In the spring of 2008, 23-year-old student Martine Vik Magnussen was out celebrating the end of her exams at a fancy club in Mayfair, London. She was having the time of her life, surrounded by all of her closest friends. Among them was her best guy friend, a man named Farouk, someone she trusted completely. Or so she thought. Later that night, Farouk invited her to his place for an after party, something they'd done many times before, but this time was different. Behind his mask of friendship, Farouk had been hiding dark and sinister desires for Martine, and that night, he chose to reveal them in the most horrific way possible. 2 days later, Martine's dead body was discovered, half buried under rubble in his basement. She had been assaulted, murdered, and abandoned by a monster that had pretended to be her best friend for months. This is the story of Martine Vik Magnussen, a young Norwegian woman that came over to the UK full of ideas and full of a lust for life, but she was betrayed by a close friend and robbed of her future. This series is intended for educational purposes, to memorialise victims and to amplify important conversations. All opinions stated are mine alone. Before we dive into this episode, I want to thank our sponsor for making this video possible, NordVPN. It's finally summer, guys, and I know so many of us are travelling this summer, myself included. I'm so excited, but a VPN is essential for my travel plans. Mainly because I love BBC iPlayer. I love the shows on BBC iPlayer, but whenever I travel outside of the country, I can't access it because it's only for the UK. I use my VPN. A VPN means that you can virtually travel to pretty much any country in the whole entire world, and you can access the internet as though you're in that country. So I do this more often when I'm at home, actually. I'm always traveling to different countries because every country has a different Netflix library. So I'm always Googling, like, who has the coolest new movies? And then I like travel to that country. And I actually use it for a lot more serious things too, like my job. I use it every single day to research these cases and to find different news platforms and things that might be blocked in the UK. And it's so easy to use on like practically all of your devices. You just need to download the app and then with one click, you're VPN'd up, baby. I've got it on my phone, I've got it on my laptop, my PC, my tablet, I've got it on everything. And of course, there is the safety element of having a VPN, which is the most important. I probably shouldn't have started with the streaming service stuff, but that's what I get the most excited about, okay? But having a VPN enabled when you're surfing the internet means that you are protected from anyone that might be trying to hack you or access your information. You know, like free Wi-Fi things whenever you're out? You never know how secure those things are. I'm always making sure I have a VPN on when I'm like on the train Wi-Fi or on cafe Wi-Fi. And NordVPN have so many valuable extras as well, like their dark web monitor. Honestly, the idea of the dark web horrifies me. It really, really scares me. I've heard so many like true crimey horror stories from the dark web. So when I heard that NordVPN can keep an eye on it for me and I don't have to make sure that my information's not circling on some shady websites, I said, yep, sign me up. Honestly, I could really go on and on and on about all the amazing things that you can get from a NordVPN subscription, but why don't you go and find out yourself? Lucky for you guys, NordVPN is giving you an exclusive deal when you click the link in the description. That's nordvpn.com/Eleanor. It's 100% risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. Plus, right now, with every purchase of a 2-year plan, you will get an extra 4 months for free. It's incredible. It's a really great deal, and the actual service of NordVPN is phenomenal, and I love it. So thanks again to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Before we get into this episode, I do just want to warn you, we're going to be covering a lot of sensitive topics today, including drugs, sexual assault, rape, and murder. Viewer discretion is always advised. Now, let's try to uncover how a man that has literally confessed to murdering his best friend has managed to escape justice for nearly 15 years now. Just before we do, I want to explain why my cat is like that. They just had surgery, and so this is a little protective jacket so that they don't lick at their wounds, and it just makes me feel like Elle Woods whenever I'm walking around and I see this little hot pink animal at the side of me. So yeah, she's just gonna sleep in the back, if that's all right with you guys. I think she really needs a mum right now. So let's set the scene. It was early spring in one of the richest, glitziest parts of London, famous for being the most expensive square on the Monopoly board, Mayfair. On March 13th, 2008, 23-year-old Martine Vik Magnussen and her friends went on a celebratory night out to mark the end of that university term. Martine looked beautiful, as she always did. Her hair was long, blonde, wavy, and backcombed. She had this thick eyeliner on, pink lipstick. She was the epitome of 2008 beauty. Her and all of her friends were in really good spirits that night. They were celebrating the bright future that university was soon to bring them. But as they all put on their lipstick and their high heels, they had no idea that a horrific tragedy was just hours away. Martine would never be seen alive again. Her disappearance completely tore apart the lives of her friends, her family, everyone that knew her. She was born in Oslo, Norway on February 6th, 1985, to her parents Odd Petter Magnussen and Kristin Vik. Martine was the middle child of her family. She had an older brother named Magnus and a younger sister named Mathilde, and they all grew up on this quite small island in Norway called Nasoya. She was raised in a very happy, warm and loving family, and they really nurtured Martine as she grew into this very curious, adventurous young kid. She loved to explore. She loved nature, she loved the outdoors, she loved climbing trees, building snowmen, running off the end of the pier and jumping into the lake. She grew up to be a very popular girl. I mean, it was hard not to like Martine. She was just very friendly, charming. She didn't hurt a fly. And in fact, she was one of the big social links of, I guess, that whole entire island, or at least the young people on that island. She would host garden parties every summer that she would invite like everyone she knew to. Everyone would be singing, dancing, cooking, drinking. Everyone that attended those parties has incredible memories of them, and all of that was made possible by Martine. Her father, Odd, described her as pure sunshine, and he always encouraged every single passion and interest that she ever had in her childhood, and she had quite a lot. At times she wanted to be a prima ballerina. At one point she wanted to be a professional netballer or a show jumper because she loved horses. In fact, when she was still very young, her dad actually went and made a deal with one of the local farmers where they essentially kind of hired a horse that would stay there at his farm, but Martine could go and feed it and play with it and ride it whenever she wanted. She was so grateful, she was so excited. Things were going really well with this horse, right? Until one day, she takes the horse on a day when she's meant to be at school, and she rides it to school to go and show all of her friends. And I loved that. I think that's such a cool story. I don't really know what happened. She probably got into trouble, but like, hey, that's really cool, nice horse. How cool would that girl be when you're in primary school and she like just comes in like clip-clopping on her horse? You'd think she was like a god. But anyway, in 1999, Martine was 14 years old and her parents decided to separate. I believe Martine then moved to Oslo with her mother. Still in Norway, she saw her father a lot. They remained very close through the rest of her life. Not much really changed, but now she was in high school, and Martine, one thing about Martine is that she was very driven. She was very ambitious and very, very intelligent. She could have done pretty much whatever career she set her mind to, but her first choice was medicine. I mean, it makes sense. She was a very caring, loving, helpful person. She always wanted to be helpful. So it makes sense that she would want to go into healthcare. And she was well on her way to that dream career. She had brilliant grades. She was doing a lot of volunteering as well at like hospitals and old people's homes to get experience under her belt. She was gonna get that job for sure. Then at the age of 21, she enrolled in university over 1,000 miles away from where she lived in Norway. She decided to go to Poland to a medical school in Warsaw. And she gave it her best shot in university. But as the months went by, Martine realised that she didn't really enjoy studying medicine the way that she thought she would. For years, she had been so set on this career path, but now it just seemed like it wasn't for her. She was 7 months into this course and she decided to cut her losses, this wasn't for her, so she dropped out of university and decided to rethink her life path. She knew for sure that she wanted to keep studying. She was going to go back to university and get a degree in something, but just not medicine. And she also knew that she wanted to keep traveling the world. Obviously, the first chance that she got, she moved away to a different country, and she wanted to keep that streak going. Remembering fondly her past trips to England, she'd visited London a lot and she really liked it. So that made sense to her. She could speak English, it was a whole new environment, a whole new culture, all new people, and a whole new career opportunity. So she moved to London and enrolled in Regent's Business School to do international business relations. So this was like a small private school, very focused on business. It attracted a lot of international students, a lot of very wealthy international students. I think she was living in some sort of student accommodation for the first few months, but soon enough, she ended up moving into a tiny flat with 3 other girls from her course. They were actually 3 other Norwegian girls named Ceci, Nina and Tal. And these girls had the absolute best time living with each other. They said that that house was loud, it was chaotic, it was lively, it was fun. And Martine was a huge part of that fun, lively atmosphere. She was always making people laugh, playing pranks on people. She was very mischievous. And she loved the nightlife of London. She was a party girl, as so many young students are. She was 23 and living the dream. Thursday, March 13th, 2008 was another night out for the girls, but it wasn't just any other night out. Tonight was quite special because they were celebrating. It was just over a year since Martine had moved to London and all of the students had taken their exams at the end of that university year, and Martine had come top of her class. She was buzzing, especially because she'd had that career redirection. She'd been so set on medicine, and then it kind of felt like a landslide when she couldn't do it. It felt like everything had just crumbled underneath her. But now she was in business school and she was doing damn well. This was a cause for celebration. So that night they were heading out to Maddox in Mayfair, which is an exclusive members only club for like rich, important people. It was very popular with Regent's Business School students, especially on Thursdays. There must have been some sort of like 2-for-1 on cocktails deal or something. So the girls were getting ready that night on March 13th, knowing that they were about to see like everyone they knew inside that club. Maddox is even a hotspot for some celebrities like Beyonce, Prince Harry. Like, because it's exclusive and members only and you have to pay a fee to be able to go there, that's where all the famous people are. Martine, Nina and Ceci all started getting ready at about 7:30 p.m. They were borrowing each other's clothes, drinking cheap wine, singing along to their favourite songs, having a bit of a gossip. Oh my god, I love getting ready with the girls before a night out. And Martine looked gorgeous that night. She'd spent ages in front of the mirror doing her makeup. She'd painted on this very sparkly silver eyeshadow. She was wearing a full designer outfit, making sure that she was Maddox material. She wanted to fit right in amongst these rich people, all the celebs, all of the elite of London were going to be there. As they were all getting ready at home, Martine was texting around pretty much everyone that they knew, asking if they were going to be there tonight, how they were getting there, what time they were getting there, you know, just coordinating. And one of the people she was texting was her closest guy friend, who also went to her university, 21-year-old Farouk Abdulhak. They'd known each other for about 8 months at this point, as she'd known everyone in her London circle for about 8 months. She'd only been living there a year. But she'd grown really close with Farouk in that time. In fact, he'd grown very close with her. You could tell that he had a bit of a crush on her. And they would text all the time, back and forth. They would teach each other words in their own languages. He spoke Arabic, she spoke Norwegian, so they'd like teach each other how to swear in different languages and stuff. And Martine's friends would always tease her about him, saying, oh, is that your boyfriend? And she would deny it. She'd say, no, he's just my friend. I don't see him like that. I mean, it was obvious that he had a crush on her. Everyone knew that, but she just kind of ignored it because she liked him as a friend and she didn't want anything more than that. The two of them bonded a lot on very serious, like deep things. They confided in each other secrets and softer parts of themselves, the trauma that they'd been through in life. Farouk had told Martine that he felt a lot of pressure from his family, not only to do well in university, but to do well in absolutely every aspect of his life, because his family were well known in Yemen. Trust me, we'll get back to that in a bit. But he felt so much pressure to be the perfect son and the perfect heir to his father's business empire. And Martina felt really sorry for Farouk. His dad had been absent and uncaring for all of his life, and she could tell just how much this had really affected him. Even Martina's mother knew about Farouk's daddy issues. When Martina had gone home for Christmas and seen her family, she was telling them all about these friends that she was making in London. She got up a picture of Farouk on her phone and she was saying to her mum, like, how sad is that? I feel so sorry for him. So much so that she felt this responsibility to make sure that this boy, this man, has a better life going forward. And so she started introducing Farouk to her friends, to her social circle. She was giving him opportunities. And when she brought him around all of her friends, they thought he was alright. I mean, he was quite shy, quite awkward, but hey, so were a lot of people. But soon Martina's friends, especially her roommates, realised that he was shy and awkward because he had a big old crush on her. They could tell he was just absolutely enamoured with her, and it was like he was just waiting for her to turn around and say, you know what, I like you too. But Farouk needed to get in line. He was one of many, many men that liked Martina. In fact, her friends always joked that there were no men left in London because all of them were just in love with Martina. She was so beautiful. She was so charming. She was a knockout. But she just didn't see Farouk that way. So she kind of ignored his advances, and she was usually pretty good at setting boundaries with people. But Farouk just wasn't seeming to get the message. She would turn him down when he would cross the line with something, but then a week later, he would try again. And then again and again, ignoring her boundaries completely. Only a month before this incident, he'd actually tried to kiss her on the lips, and she'd recoiled back being like, whoa, I just see you as a friend. She actually said to her friends that she didn't know why he thought he could do that. Like, she hadn't been giving him any kind of impression. There wasn't a vibe there. There was no, like, sexual tension. She was really confused why he had just overstepped like that. But the thing with Farouk Abdulhak is that he was never really told no as a child. Everything he wanted, daddy's money could buy him, and he'd never really had to deal with rejection or anything like that. So when Martina would turn him down, that just like didn't compute for him. He doesn't know what it feels like to not get what you want. So he keeps going thinking, oh well, she's gonna come around to it at some point. Let's talk about who his daddy is, shall we? All that daddy's money's coming from somewhere. His father was Farouk Abdulhak, one of Yemen's richest men, a multi-billionaire. Like an absolute business tycoon. He owns so many things. So to say that Farouk came from complete privilege would be an understatement. The Abdulhaks had power and influence in almost every single industry. Worldwide, but especially back home in Yemen, his dad was literally one of the most important people in that whole entire country. He was actually the first person in Yemen to own a private jet. His family had these huge mega mansions all over the world in different countries, and loads of them in Yemen too, and they would have full bodies of staff just to take care of their family. That's maids, chefs, nannies, chauffeurs, servants, everything. And I do think about this quite often, about children that grow up with so much and they've never had to experience less. How do you explain to a child that this is not normal? The life that we live is not normal. Well, I guess they don't really explain that to their kids, do they? Because then that's how they end up being entitled, like Farouk. His father was always moving the family around from country to country when he was chasing different business opportunities and different business partners. So Farouk would be forced to say goodbye to his life and rebuild completely every few years. As rich as he was, his childhood was still tumultuous in that way. He didn't have a social group that he could depend on. He didn't have any long-term friends. No one outside of his insane family. Over the years, Farouk grew up to be a whole entire 5'7". He was slim, he had dark hair, dark eyes, he was always decked out in designer. Are you surprised? He spent a lot of his teenage years in Cairo, in Egypt. That's where his family kind of settled finally. And while he was there, he was actually training to be a wrestler. And he was quite a small guy, but apparently he was a lot stronger than he looked. Although one time he did arrive at one of his training sessions drunk. He had driven there. He had drunk drove there. But of course, he never really saw any punishment for that. or for anything else he ever did, which will be a running theme in Farouk's life. Daddy's money and his power managed to protect Farouk from every single consequence ever in life, both little and large. His wrestling trainer obviously saw him come to work plastered drunk, driving in plastered, and so he starts having a go at him, saying just how dangerous and illegal it was, and Farouk responded, "It doesn't matter, I have diplomatic immunity." Farouk's father was a diplomat, and that means that him and all of his family can benefit from diplomatic immunity, which basically means while ever they're in another country, they cannot be arrested or prosecuted for any crimes or civil cases. Obviously, they're all originally from Yemen, they'd moved to Egypt, and so they have this diplomatic immunity. They basically have a literal get out of jail free card. And Farouk seemingly knew that very well, and he was using it to his advantage. He was willingly going out and committing crimes knowing that, well, what are they going to do? They can't do anything. He didn't care who he was a danger to, whose life he was putting at risk. It was just Farouk's world. But it's worth noting that even though he takes advantage of every single privilege that his father could provide for him, Farouk never actually really liked his father. I mean, he complained about him so much to Martina, and we know that he had a rocky childhood with his father being very absent and quite uncaring. His father was supposedly very strict and ruled over his family with an iron fist. Their reputation meant absolutely everything. And his father knew that his children were the heirs to his business empire, and so they had to be as intelligent and cutthroat as he is. In fact, Farouk and all of his siblings were expected to have arranged marriages to the offspring of other very rich, successful, powerful Yemeni families. At the time of this case, Farouk was 21, and he was nearing that time that his father was going to start marrying him off and expecting him to take over the empire. So he knew that those couple of years that he was about to spend at university in London, that was his last taste of freedom. And while he was in a completely different country to the rest of his family, while he was studying in university, Farouk started to stray from his very strict Islamic faith. He started to break a lot of rules. He was drinking a lot, engaging in relations that weren't pre-approved by his father. But like I say, he was taking advantage of this last little pocket of freedom before his life was signed away to business deals and stress. Farouk loved a good night out, especially at Maddox, because that really fit his elitist kind of mentality that he had. He was so special and powerful that he could only spend his time around other special, powerful people. He ended up buying an apartment in Mayfair, which anyone that lives in London, that will have just sent a shockwave of, oh my God, through your body. He bought an apartment in Mayfair at the age of 21. Those apartments are so expensive that I don't even want to look it up because it'll hurt my feelings. But I think there were several reasons that he bought an apartment so close to Maddox. One, he loved going clubbing there. It was super close. It was convenient. Two, it was convenient for everyone else that lived further out in London to be able to just stay at Farouk's house after these nights out at Maddox. And when I say everyone, I mean just Martina. She was the only one he would ever really ask to stay over. Everyone else always wanted to go home. To be fair, no one else really knew Farouk as well as Martina did. So I guess maybe that's why her friends, her roommates never stayed at Farouk's. They always just went home after the nights out. But not Martina. She had actually stayed over at his house on her own several times and things had been fine. So, let's talk about the night out in question. Thursday, March 13th, 2008. Around 10 p.m, Martina and her friends, her roommates, walk into Maddox. Farouk saw her and he just knew that he wanted to keep her as long as he possibly could. He didn't want this night to end. And there are tons of photographs from this night, from Martina's last ever night out. And it's both so haunting, but so heartwarming to see how happy she was. She was having the best time. She was so youthful and so bright and so beautiful, and it all comes across in these photos. And there are multiple photos that feature just Martina and Farouk, her arms wrapped around him because he was her closest guy friend, and she trusted him. The group spent the next 5 hours drinking, dancing, doing a little bit of cooking in the bathrooms, and by 3 a.m, Almost everyone was ready to call it a night and go home. Martina, however, was not one of those people. She was quite the party animal, and when all her friends were saying, right, it's time to go home, we're gonna get a taxi back, she was like, no! Farouk invited Martina back to his place for an little after party. So before they left to go to Farouk's house, Martina walked her friends to the taxi rank, said goodbye to them, gave them the last ever hug and kiss she would ever give them, and they never saw her again. Martina went back into Maddox, and then 20 minutes later, both her and Farouk left. They were walking arm in arm to the local taxi rank. They were heading to his house, and that was the last time anyone ever saw Martina. She was in the company of her close, trusted friend. Why would anyone have a cause to worry? The next morning, Martina's roommates woke up, probably a bit hungover, around 11 AM, and they realised that Martina was not in the house. They weren't concerned about this though, because they thought that Martina was going to Farouk's house after the night out. She'd done that a couple of times before, so you know, she's an adult woman, she can make her own decisions. She just stayed over at a friend's. On a normal day, I think her friends would have texted her or called her just to make sure, just to check that she was alright. But at the time of this case, Martina had lost her phone. And it was 2008, so people weren't exactly like addicted to their phones like they are now. If you lost your phone or broke it or whatever, you would go for like a week or two without one until you managed to get a new one. So she didn't have a phone. And everyone in her life knew that, so people weren't trying to text and call her, trying to figure out where she was, and no one was really expecting any updates from her. As the day went by, the girls were recovering from their hangover in their own time. They actually had plans later that evening, and they were expecting Martina to come back through the door any minute, but by 4 PM she still wasn't home. So they decided to leave her a message on Facebook. She wasn't active on Facebook at the time, but they thought just in case she managed to get access to a laptop or something, then they might as well message her. They messaged Farouk as well while they were there, but they didn't get a response from either of them, neither were active. But they were still kind of hoping that Martina was just going to walk through the door any minute now and laugh at them for being so worried about her. It wasn't until 10 PM that night that the girls really started to worry, because like I said, they had plans that evening. It was like a little girls' night, they were going to go out to a bar, and Martina was supposed to be there, but she hadn't come home. They weren't assuming the absolute worst at this point, but they were worried for sure. And so before they left for this girls' night, they messaged her again. They texted her on her phone just in case, messaged her on Facebook. They were practically doing everything that they could just to say, look, we're worried about you. Please get back to someone, we're going to the bar. They thought that maybe she might meet them there. Maybe, of course, she hadn't had her phone, she hadn't been able to contact them. Maybe it was her plan that she was going to stay out all day and then meet them at the bar later on. But she never came to the bar. The girls couldn't stay there for more than 1 or 2 drinks because the atmosphere was just so tense. They couldn't have fun and act like any other night because it wasn't any other night. One of their friends was not there. There was an empty seat at the table and they had no idea where she was. Any attempt to try to relax or try to have fun felt fake and felt unfair when Martina wasn't there to join in. So they went back home earlier than they would have, and they were really hoping that they were just going to walk in, Martina would be home by now, she'd be tucked up in bed sleeping after her wild adventure over the last day. But again, when they came in the house, there was no sign of Martina. By now, it was almost 24 hours since they had last seen her, since they had left the club, since she'd walked them to the taxi rank and seen them off. It had been nearly 24 hours. So now her 3 friends, her 3 roommates, decided that they would call the police and report her missing. And not only that, they also walked to the closest police station with a printed out photo of Martine. And on the back, they had written Farouk's full name and his address. They told the police when they handed over this photo that the name and the address on the back of that piece of paper was the last person, the last place that Martina was known to have been. And you know what? Those girls did a really freaking good job in such a quick space of time. They really identified what the key pieces of information were, they gathered it all and they presented it to the police. They were so efficient with time there. But even though the police had been handed this kit to be able to solve this case, they all but laughed in the girls' faces. They said that Martina was probably just on some wild night out and they should just wait for her to return home. They did absolutely nothing about it. At least not that night. They waited until the next day, and about 12 hours in, they sent 2 police officers to Martina's apartment to speak with her roommates. They were asking all kinds of questions about Martina, about Farouk, but the police didn't really do anything useful or give them any reassurance or anything. I feel like one of the biggest reasons they actually went round to the apartment that day was to just be able to confirm on record that she wasn't at her own house. They just didn't have any urgency with this case whatsoever. You could tell that the police weren't taking this seriously and they thought it was just some kind of drunk runaway situation. So now we are 36 hours into a missing persons investigation of a young woman, and there has been no real help from the police whatsoever. Her friends were getting very frustrated and very worried, and they felt like no one else was taking this seriously. But they knew who would. They got in contact with Martina's parents over in Norway. At first, her father was in denial. He reminded her friends that she had lost her phone, so of course she's not in contact. He told them not to worry too much. But her roommates gave him even more detail, and they spoke about the person that she was last seen with. There was just something about this situation. It was like her roommates felt it in their gut that something was wrong. I guess it just goes to show that they never really trusted Farouk's intentions with Martina in the first place. The fact that she was in his company and then she goes missing and they are so sure that he did something. Like, her friends must have thought that he was a bit of a suspicious guy for their brains to jump straight to that, you know? If one of my friends went missing for a day and they were with another one of their friends, I don't think I would immediately start blaming or being suspicious of their friend. But yeah, like I said, that speaks volumes about what Farouk was like and how he was with Martina. Her roommates suggested to Martina's father that he should come over to England and help them search because the police weren't taking this seriously and they knew that they needed to act fast. And I think it was when her roommates suggested that he should come over to England, I think that's when it really clicked for him just how serious this was. They weren't going to make him cross the country if she was just on some like drunk weekend bender, you know? Her parents were absolutely horrified and so panicked. They hopped on a plane as quickly as they could pack a bag and rush to the airport. And the idea of that plane journey is just awful to me. Obviously, I talk about a lot of these different true crime cases that feature this harrowing plane journey where a parent has been told their child is missing. There's a whole entire search going on for them in this different country, and now the parent has to put their phone on aeroplane mode and completely disconnect from all updates for however many hours. I mean, this flight won't have been too long, only a couple of hours because it was just across Europe. But I think about like the Grace Millane case, for example. She was from England, her family was from England, and they had to travel all the way to New Zealand. You would just feel sick to your stomach the whole entire time, not being able to communicate with anyone, not being able to get those updates from the police as they come in. While Martina's friends waited for her parents to get the flight in, they were all huddled round the very cramped little table in their kitchen doing their own detective work, doing whatever they could since the police weren't doing fuck all. They created a Facebook group called Please Help Us Find Martina, appealing to anyone that might have information. They spent that whole entire night, they stayed up taking different messages, taking phone numbers and names, calling those phone numbers to see if they could give any information. They really were doing so much more than the actual detectives, the actual police were doing for Martina. The girls checked Farouk's Facebook page to see if he'd been active since they last saw him, and he had. He had posted something quite concerning, actually. At 4 AM on the night that Martina went missing, just 40 minutes after they had left Maddox together, he updated his Facebook page to say Farouk Abdulhak is home alone. Home alone. It made no sense considering Martina was staying the night at his. How was he home alone 40 minutes after leaving the club? And I think it's also just very strange in itself that you would write that as your Facebook status. Like, I know that this was 2008, it was a different time, I wasn't really on Facebook in 2008. With early social media, people were posting a right load of shit, weren't they? Like, nothing, like, there was no value in anyone's post. It's like, I just ate some noodles. But posting that you're home alone at 4 AM, I just think It's so literal in its attempt at being an alibi, like it's almost comically ridiculous. It's like, don't worry, officer, look at my Facebook status. It says I was home alone last night, so I can't be responsible for this crime. Like, what? Seeing this Facebook status on Farouk's page just confirmed the girls' suspicions even more. They knew they were on the right track. They knew that Farouk had done something to their friend. So they kept digging into this lead, and they managed to get a hold of Farouk's brother, who lived, of course, back over in Egypt, and they were speaking to him, and he said that he hadn't been able to get a hold of Farouk all day. He wasn't answering his texts or his calls, and this just added to all of that suspicion. He had gone radio silent. And so the girls took everything that they had just found out as they'd been working together on this case, and they took it to the police, and they said, look, he has posted this Facebook status, he's not getting in touch with any of his family, something weird is going on here. And so the police looked into it, they go to the computer, type in his Facebook link, and it's gone. He had deleted his whole Facebook page, and now the police were actually starting to take this seriously, because who just deletes their Facebook page like in the middle of the night for no reason? Especially a popular young social uni student like Farouk, who would use it to plan things and to make friends. It wasn't that they didn't believe her friends earlier on, but there could have been a reasonable explanation. But now it was like 2 whole days out. The guy that she was last seen with has deleted his Facebook page. This is looking serious now. So within 15 minutes of hearing about his deleted Facebook page, police were at Martina's apartment, taking her hairbrush and her toothbrush, anything that they could get her DNA from. By the Sunday morning, it had been 2 whole days now. Martina's family were just coming into London on their flight, and the police were travelling to Farouk's apartment, first of all, to see if they could find him, but second of all, to search it. When they got there, the apartment had been deserted. Almost everything was still there, still in its place, but there was no sign of Farouk and no sign of his essential items. Things like his passport, his wallet, his phone, his clothes. It was all evidence that he had fled the scene. Of course, the detectives had a terrible feeling about this, and that only got even worse when they noticed a crumpled up tank top on the floor of his apartment. It clearly didn't belong to Farouk. It was petite, rather feminine, and he wasn't exactly known to be that. The t-shirt was taken in as evidence, and when police looked back at the photos that Martina's friends had brought into the station, you know, the last photos ever taken of her on that night out, she was wearing that exact tank top. The police were discovering very quickly that Martina's friends had been on the right track from the very beginning. They must have known. And now their suspicions about Farouk were materialising into real evidence. Once Martina's mum and dad arrived into London, they were transported to the police station, where all of her friends and her roommates had been practically camping out for the last God knows how many hours, waiting for the freshest updates. But then came the update that everyone had been dreading. One of the officers that had been searching Farouk's apartment had noticed some tiny blood droplets leading out of his front door, down the steps, and to the basement in his building. The trail led up to a padlocked door, one that police officers couldn't get into. There were no keys laying around in the apartment. Someone had made sure that people couldn't get into this little room. Obviously, that wasn't going to stop the police. They can break doors down if they need to. They can kick shit in. But they were already very fearful of what they might find behind that door. When they managed to break through this door into Farouk's basement, under a pile of rubble lay the beaten, bloodied and brutalised dead body of Martine Vik Magnussen. She was only semi-clothed when they found her, although she did still have that sparkly silver eyeshadow on that she very excitedly painted on before that night out. When she was discovered, most of her body had been covered up intentionally with this like construction rubble that had been left down in the basement. But one of her arms was stretching out, and that was actually what the police saw. That was what alerted them to her body, almost as if she was reaching to be saved. Everyone's hearts shattered into a million pieces. All of the hope drained out of them as this case turned from a missing person to a murder inquiry. The police locked down the crime scene, and the most important thing right now was locating Farouk Abdulhak, who had been conveniently missing along with Martine this whole entire time. Martina's friends told the police everything about this man, about his huge crush on her and his inability to accept her rejections and how entitled he is just in general about everything. The police agreed that there was certainly a motive there. He wanted this girl who didn't want him back, and she had been pretty much the first person in his life to ever tell him no, and to stick with it as well, because I get the impression from the way that he was trying again and again and again that he thought he could wear her down. But maybe it was becoming evident to him that she wasn't going to come round to this. She wasn't going to like him back. And so maybe he got really angry. Farouk Abdulhak was the only suspect in this case. I mean, her body was literally found in the basement of his building. There was a blood trail leading from his apartment. There are very few other people on this planet that it could have been. When Martina's body was taken from the crime scene and taken for an autopsy, it was discovered that she had suffered a total of 43 separate injuries, and at least 20 of those were to her face and neck. There was a huge amount of bruising and scraping, scratching, swelling from where she had had to fight for her life. There was a major struggle with her attacker, but her cause of death was confirmed to be strangulation. There were these huge marks on her neck where her killer had very up close and personally squeezed all of the life out of her. Her toxicology report, of course, showed the alcohol and the cocaine that she'd had that night. But what was interesting was it was less than everyone imagined. It really wasn't a large amount at all. In fact, it shows that she probably would have been very aware and very alert when all of this was happening to her. As she was fighting for her life, she would have been very aware that she was losing, and very aware that this man, her guy best friend that she had trusted for so long, was trying to kill her. And of course, we have to talk about the state of undress that Martina was found in. Her autopsy confirmed that she had been raped by her attacker. They were able to recover semen from inside of her, and they were able to make links to Farouk. Now that confuses me. Does it confuse you? We've tried to dig into this because I was really confused why they didn't just say it was a match to Farouk. What do you mean the semen has links to him? That's the strangest way I've ever heard it put. But I think I've figured it out. In the same way that they went to Martina's house and got her toothbrush and her hairbrush for DNA testing, I believe they'd done the same with Farouk. Because he wasn't there to get an actual swab or any kind of real samples, they may have just had to compare this semen DNA with, like, yeah, his spit DNA or something like that. Maybe that's why it's not an exact match, but is a link. Either way, this was pretty damning evidence to everyone that saw it and heard of it. The police believed that most of the attack had taken place in the apartment. The rape, the struggle, the strangulation. It's believed that Farouk then picked up Martina's limp body and carried her down the stairs to the basement, hoping that he could just hide all of this behind a padlocked door and no one would ever find it. But Martina had bled all the way there. She had left a little trail for police to follow. In some kind of tragic way, she had helped to solve her own murder case. Now, this whole thing seems totally cut and dry, doesn't it? The killer couldn't really be anyone else other than Farouk. All of the evidence is in his apartment. Semen that can be linked to him is inside of her. Like, who else is it gonna be? This guy that she had befriended and welcomed into her social circle and felt so sorry for him. She had done so much to be his shoulder to cry on and to make him feel better. And this whole entire time, it was now seeming like he'd had these dark, sinister intentions and thoughts about her. Maybe it was a case of if he couldn't have her, and if she wasn't going to turn around and love him back, then no one can have her. And one thing that makes it all even worse for me is that Martina was staying at his house that night for a reason. He lived literally just down the road from the club, and she was very intoxicated. She knew that it would be dangerous to try and trek across London and get herself home all on her own in the early hours of the morning. She thought that she was doing the safest thing here, staying with this friend that she trusted. He literally goes to her uni. He's in her social circles. She thought that this man could be accounted for. It's just so incredibly heartbreaking that the biggest danger to Martina that night was this friend that she thought she trusted so much. So now all that was left to do was to track down Farouk Abdulhak and arrest him. But this would prove to be a way bigger challenge than police ever could have imagined. None of Farouk's friends in London knew where he was. They'd tried to text him and call him. No one could get a hold of him. In fact, his mobile phone, they'd managed to get in touch with his network provider. His mobile phone had stopped pinging. Like, it seemed like he'd taken the whole entire thing apart, taken the SIM card out of his phone. But police were able to get a hold of his call history when they called his phone network. All of the stuff that he'd done up until fleeing. They found that in the early hours of Friday morning, right around the time that Martina would have been killed, he had been desperately trying to get a hold of his family back over in Egypt. He was calling his mum, his brother, his father. Of course, we don't know the contents of these calls or who picked up or how many calls were taken or whatever. We just know that he was frantically, desperately calling. And then shortly after those calls, he updates his Facebook status saying that he is home alone. About an hour after that, at 5 AM, Farouk just randomly turns up at one of his friend's flats. And I don't know why, I don't know if they'd had a conversation before this, but he turns up and the friend said that Farouk was obviously quite anxious and stressed. So they smoked a joint together and then Farouk left. He didn't say anything really about this situation, but he just went back home. I don't think he got a wink of sleep at all that night, because only a couple of hours later, at 9:30 in the morning, he called one of his London friends to let them know that he was leaving England that morning because of a family emergency at home. When detectives found this out, it sent a wave of fear through them all. Over 48 hours ago, Farouk had intentions of leaving the country. So he was probably gone by now. And you know what's so frustrating? The police sat on this case for a couple of days, not really doing anything, waiting for Martine to just show up again. Maybe if they'd have acted a bit fucking faster, then they might have had a better chance of tracking him. But by now, he could be anywhere at all in the whole entire world. So where do police start with that? They searched up the airports closest to him that did flights out to Cairo in Egypt and to Yemen because, like I say, his family owned so much in Yemen, but they were mainly based in Cairo, so they didn't really know where he was going to go, Egypt or Yemen. But they managed to figure out which airports he could have gone to, and then they scoured the CCTV footage of those places until eventually they found it. Less than 12 hours after Martina was last seen alive, Farouk Abdulhak had boarded a flight to Cairo, Egypt. At this point in time, his father wasn't actually in Yemen or in Cairo. He was in Norway doing some business meetings, which is painfully ironic that that is the home country of his son's alleged murder victim. And he was getting this news over the phone. At least we believe so. We've had to do quite a bit of speculation about this part because obviously phone calls aren't recorded and the phone logs are very basic, but we theorize that he called up his father that morning and basically told him, look, Dad, I've done something fucking horrible and I need your help. I need to get out of the UK. I need you to protect me. And so we theorize that he and his father made a deal to both go and meet in Cairo immediately. So Farouk jumps on a plane in London, heads straight there, and then his father finishes up his business meetings in Norway and he too jumps on a plane to Cairo and they land around about the same time. Now, the police timelines get even more blurry from this point on because the Abdulhaks were a very secretive family and they were very, very rich and very influential. They had so many security guards and like whole teams dedicated to their privacy. So no wonder we can't find that much. However, it's rumoured that the first place they went was to their family home. They gathered everyone important, Farouk, his mum, his dad, and his brother. And they just basically talked it all out, I guess. Talked about what their options were and what the fuck they were gonna do. It was decided that the best place for Farouk right now would be Yemen, because that's where his family had the most power, the most influence, and the most money. So they grabbed his father's private jet and shipped him off to Yemen. This was a very clever move from Farouk and his family, something that the UK police were, well, they couldn't really fight back against it, and I'll tell you why. The UK doesn't have an extradition treaty with Yemen, so they can't get Farouk brought back over, no matter what evidence they have. Well, this seemed absolutely heinous to everyone in the UK, considering how damning the evidence is. They literally found his semen inside of her body, her blood trailing down his steps. Surely evidence that is that damning could be cause for a one-off deal to be made for his extradition. Martine's family had high hopes that the Yemeni government might take a look at this request and take pity on their family. Maybe they would understand how devastating this whole thing would be for them, and they could strike a one-off deal. But no. Yemen blocks extradition altogether in their constitution. They just don't really trust other countries' courts, and they want to protect their own people. And Farouk was being protected, all right. Not only by his own government, but of course by his own billionaire business tycoon father, who practically owned the whole of Yemen. I'll be honest though, I think his father cared more about what this could do to his business and to his companies and to his reputation than, I don't know, than whatever his son's going through. I think his father was only thinking about himself. Maybe a little bit about his son, but more so he just wanted to get rid of this and to hush it all so that he could continue making billions. His father's name was Farouk Abdulhak. I'm not sure if I've actually mentioned that yet, but Mr. Abdulhak was trying his absolute best to make this problem go away. He was arranging meetings left, right, and centre with all the most important people in Yemen, like the Minister of Justice, anyone that had any kind of influence in law enforcement. Shara made all of these people guarantee that no matter what, Farouk would never be handed back over to the UK, no matter what evidence they had against him. Because really, that's all they had to worry about, was him being handed to the UK, because while ever he was in Yemen, he was safe. Everyone there was kind of scared of his father. They knew, well, not scared, maybe intimidated is the word to use. They knew how much power and influence he had and how crucial he was to the whole trade market of Yemen. Whatever Shara said goes, even if it's something as questionable and immoral as this. How on earth were Martine's family ever gonna be able to get justice when the whole of Yemen's government had vowed to protect the prime suspect in their daughter's murder case? This whole time, Farouk had just been living it up in Yemen. I mean, he'd been there less than a week, so it hadn't been all that long, but he knows that he is so safe there. As long as his father's alive and fighting for him, he's fine. He is gotten away with murder. He could sit back and relax in their mega mansions, in their hotels, by the pool, sipping on a cocktail if he wanted, but I'm guessing he was back to that strict Islamic faith now that he was back with his family. But my point is, he didn't have to worry about that ongoing murder investigation that he was currently the prime suspect of back in London. Meanwhile, Martine's family went to the morgue to go and identify the dead body of their daughter. She lay there cold and grey. All of that bright, fun, loving energy had just been drained out of her. Her father said that she looked peaceful, like she was just sleeping. And then when he went to stroke her cheek and give her a kiss for the final time, he felt just how cold and stiff she was. And that was confirmation that his baby was gone. For Martine's family, this was such a visceral and heart-shattering experience. It was so real and incomprehensible that their loved one had been brutally ripped from them in the worst way possible, and they were never going to see or speak to her or feel her energy ever again. Meanwhile, Farouk's family were treating this more like some gossipy scandal that just needed sweeping under the rug and keeping quiet. They hired a PR team to be a spokesperson for the family, like it was some sort of fucking internet cancellation. Farouk's reputation was always protected as much as it could be by his PR team, where Martina's reputation was constantly being smeared in the papers. In all kinds of different countries, the victim blaming in this case was rife. They would say that she was just a party girl, she was drunk all the time, she was on drugs that night, so something like this was bound to happen to her. They were conveniently forgetting that the boy that was responsible for doing all of this to her was one of her best friends. She hadn't put herself in any kind of questionable situation. Not that that even matters, but she was staying over at a best friend's house after a night out. She was doing everything right. She didn't want to trek across London in the early hours of the morning when it was dark and she was all on her own, so she stayed at a trusted friend's house. And it was just so unfortunate that that best friend was a wolf in sheep's clothing. The detectives on Martina's case and the UK government as a whole began to fear that they had hit a dead end. In Yemen, Farouk had hired his own top-class legal team. You can imagine the kind of lawyers that his father could hire. And Farouk was actually currently in hiding. His father had so many different properties all over Yemen, and he'd picked specifically one that was very isolated on the top of a mountain, like he was a fucking goat. It was very luxurious, don't get me wrong, but it was a prison of its own kind. There was no one around to talk to. There was nothing really. In July 2008, 4 months after Martine Vik Magnussen's body had been found covered in rubble in his basement, the British police and the Crown Prosecution Service formally charged Farouk Abdulhak with the rape and murder of Martine. He was moved to the very top of Scotland Yard's most wanted list, and if he ever tried to step foot out of Yemen, the police would be right there waiting for him with an arrest warrant and handcuffs. But that could be a very long waiting game. They could only act if/when Farouk ever left the country, but who's to say he's ever gonna leave? Why would you when your dad has more than enough money, more than enough properties to keep you entertained and protected forever? At this point in time, Martina's friends and family, especially back over in Norway, were thinking the Norwegian government could probably do a bit more to help out here. The UK government were doing all that they could, and up until now, the Norwegian government were leaving it to the Brits, since it did happen in this country. It makes sense, but when things were going nowhere, they needed all hands on deck. Everyone that could possibly help needed to help. So they held a protest in Norway. They managed to get 27,000 signatures on a petition, and bear in mind, this was like before social media was massive. They got Norwegian politicians to write letters and emails to Farouk's dad's business partners. So he worked with a load of big companies like Xerox and Mercedes and Coca-Cola, and they were all writing to these companies to say, hey, just so you know, this guy that you work with, his son's a suspected murderer. Maybe you should cut ties. And actually quite a few of them did, but that's not any justice for Martine, is it? 2 years after her murder, her friends and family reached out to the former Norwegian Prime Minister to see if he could do anything. As soon as he read about Martine's case, his heart was broken and he knew he wanted to do everything that he could. And so he got on the phone, did a few emails, and somehow he managed to schedule a meeting with Farouk's father himself. The former Norwegian Prime Minister was going to fly out to Cairo to speak with Farouk's father. This was huge. They were going to be able to confront him face to face. So he flies out there, they get to this meeting, and as they're talking about it all, Farouk's father bursts into tears. He said that he was just so overwhelmed and so stressed by this whole situation. And like, I'm not surprised. Obviously, I don't agree with what he was doing in the slightest, but that is probably one of the most stressful things you can put on yourself, is trying to harbour a murderer. But despite breaking into tears and saying how stressed and how much this is for him, he still wasn't willing to give up. I'm not really sure why he agreed to do this meeting. Maybe just to use it as a therapy session, maybe just to vent, because coming out of it, nothing was really agreed. The former Prime Minister left that meeting feeling really deflated. He felt like Farouk's father had kind of taken him for a ride. He had gotten so close to making an agreement, but then there'd be something else that they need to factor in. Oh, wait, we've forgotten about this. Let's talk about this for a while. That kind of thing where, like, it got to the end of the meeting and they were like, well, shit, what did we actually just talk about for that whole entire time? But the former Prime Minister did not give up. The next year, he was able to schedule another meeting. This time, Farouk was going to be present. He was gonna be there. It had been 3.5 years since Martina's body was pulled from the rubble underneath his home. Farouk walked into that meeting and sat down with his father and the Norwegian Prime Minister, and he too broke down. He claimed that he was remorseful about this whole thing. He felt bad that Martina had lost her life. This whole thing was very sad to him. And he said that he was willing to cooperate in the investigation. Huge. But there was one part of this whole meeting that was fucked up, especially fucked up, was that to say that Farouk had been friends with Martina for 8 months, they called each other best friends, they'd grown so close, he was now refusing to call her by name. He would only refer to her as the deceased, which is fucked up. Let me repeat it. Sorry for swearing. I know some of you watch these videos with young people in the room. Those young people in the room would probably agree though if they understood what was going on. Nothing really came out of this meeting, but a final meeting was scheduled for February 2012. It was due to take place in Yemen with Farouk's father, his lawyer, and the former Norwegian Prime Minister. They discussed the possibility of opening a joint investigation between the British and Yemeni police, and his father seemed quite receptive to that. In fact, he was asking questions that suggested he would go through with it, you know, asking how could they keep this a secret? How could they protect his reputation throughout all this? I mean, obviously those are the only things he cared about. What did I tell you earlier? And you know I said that Farouk was going to be a part of this meeting? Well, that's what everyone thought until it got to it. And they'd sat him in a different room. I think this was his lawyer's doing, obviously. They had sat Farouk in a different room. So this meeting was going on in this room, and they would get to a point where they would need Farouk's input. So the lawyer would get up and leave and go and chat to Farouk in another room and then come back to this room and feed back. It's ridiculous. It's like when you fall out with a mate in primary school and you're like, well, I'm not going to talk to her. Go send her a message for me, you know? Surely if his lawyer was in the room, he would be able to speak. I thought that was what the lawyer was for. But this meeting went very similarly to the last ones, where it starts out with a clear direction and it seems like they're making progress, but then by the end of it, it's just devolved into this really vague agreement that isn't actually really going to do anything for anyone. There's no point pushing forward with it. There's no point spending any more time or energy on this because Farouk's father and their lawyer were really just taking everyone for a ride. They were just stalling. They were just trying to confuse. Basically, they left that final meeting with Farouk solidifying the fact that he would never return to the UK. And that was it. After this third meeting failed, Farouk's father, Shara, actually got in contact with Martina's family and offered to pay them off to just drop the case. He was going to give them £50 million if they let all of this go away. Offers of monetary compensation for someone's death is a relatively common practice in Yemen. In fact, Shara himself had actually received a monetary compensation for the murder of his own niece. Whoever had killed her had done so in the most heinous way. I think it was done out on the street and then they literally threw her body into the road. But when Farouk's father, her uncle, the most successful businessman of the whole entire family, went to go meet with the murderer's family, he accepted monetary compensation in exchange for letting the killer keep his freedom and his future. I have a lot of thoughts about that. My main one being, are you not a billionaire? Why do you care about an extra few million more than you care about justice for your niece? I think that just speaks volumes. I think money means way more to these people than people do. Farouk's father was clearly hoping that Martina's family might be the same, but he was sorely mistaken. Maybe money means more to him than his loved ones, but there was no amount of blood money that could sway Martina's family. By now, it was years out from the murder taking place, and the case was at a complete stalemate. It was still open, but what could the UK police really do? It was so frustrating because all of the evidence pointed to this one guy that they were so sure was the killer. There was no point looking anywhere else at anything else, but he was just so out of reach. They had done 99.9% of the work on this, but that last little bit was impossible. But over the years, Farouk's shield of protection has begun to crumble around him as the political tide in Yemen started to change. In 2011, there were a lot of protests going on in Yemen demanding political change. People wanted the president out. You know, the guy that Farouk's father was super close with, the guy that has been able to protect Farouk this whole entire time. The rest of Yemen wanted him out, and so he was forced to step down in 2012. So that was one of Farouk's biggest hitters out of the question now. For the last 4 years, Farouk had enjoyed all of the protection that he needed because the literal president was on his side. But that wasn't a guarantee for much longer. The unrest in Yemen continued to escalate, and in 2014, a civil war broke out. Within a year, Sana'a, where Farouk lived, had been heavily bombed, and the city was left in ruins. In December 2017, the former president and Farouk's protector, his dad's bestie, was killed. And with this, Farouk's support network completely collapsed. The very few friends and family that he had left around him all started to flee the country out of fear. Farouk was left alone and stranded in a war-torn city, unable to leave Yemen completely or he would be arrested. The consequences of his actions are always lurking in the shadows, just waiting for the time to get him. So at this point in time, even though Farouk was safe from the law and the consequences of his actions and he had a roof over his head, he was still surrounded by misery and famine everywhere he looked. It certainly wasn't the life of luxury that he was used to, that he had grown to expect everywhere he went, and soon Farouk's protection would almost completely collapse. It was bound to happen one day, but in late 2020, his father, one of the richest billionaires in Yemen, the man that had protected him through all of this, died following a battle with cancer. On his deathbed, he took out a photo of Farouk from his wallet and cried. He always said that his son, Farouk, was the biggest problem in his life. In fact, the only major problem that he'd ever had. All the stress of the business world was absolutely nothing compared to what his son had put him through. Shara was thinking, after he died, what on earth was Farouk gonna do? What would become of his son without the protection that only he could provide? Once he's gone, all of that protection is gone too. And his concerns for his son were very valid. When his dad died, obviously he had no other family left in Sana'a. And mainly in Yemen, people had fled the whole entire country, but mostly fled that city. What distant family he did have left were all arguing at this point in time over Shara's inheritance. There were 6 billions to be spread out among them. Of course there's going to be arguments. And apparently there were also a lot of arguments about what they were going to do about the Farouk situation. Now that Shara was gone, I mean, up until this point it had been all Shara's problem. It seems that he had agreed to protect his son. He had taken on that responsibility. But now that he was gone, whose responsibility was Farouk? No one wanted that to be on their back. Because a lot of them had cut ties with him or distanced from him, actually believing that he was a murderer back in London that is, of course, being protected. This case has really frustrated pretty much every single person that has ever come across it because it really is just so unfair. And then one day, a reporter at BBC Arabic, Nawal Al-Maghafi, made it her mission to go undercover and penetrate Farouk's defence. She was determined to get a confession out of him once and for all. Nawal was 33 years old and actually from Yemen herself. She had a lot of family back there, and so she was able to use her connections to be able to get a lead on Farouk. She managed to speak with a friend of his who revealed that he was a paranoid mess and he barely left the house anymore. Apparently he moves his location relatively frequently and is very secretive about his address. And like I say, he barely leaves the house, so he gets pretty much everything he possibly needs delivered directly to his door. Eventually, someone gave Nawal a picture of Farouk, a recent picture from when he had attended his father's funeral. And now he still looked like himself in the face, but he was bald with a beard. Someone also managed to give her his phone number, which she didn't want to just use straight away because that would probably put him off, to be fair, receiving a random text from a random number trying to talk to him. But then Nawal finds out that Farouk loves Snapchat at his big age. He is 35 years old, yet he uses Snapchat a lot. And I was very taken aback by that because, like, So random. Isn't that just so random? But Nawal decides to take the phone number that someone had managed to send across to her that was supposedly his, and she runs it through Snapchat, and up pops an account linked to it under the name Farouk with a bald bitmoji that looks exactly like him. This was closer than anyone had gotten to Farouk in years. Nawal wasted no time. She added the account, and very quickly, within moments, he had accepted her. Again, I found this very interesting because this guy is so paranoid, so worried about his privacy and his security, yet the second he gets added by a girl on Snapchat, he's like, oh, who's this? The two of them began talking, and he was just getting to know her the same as he would any other lady friend. He told her that he was 35 years old and that he currently works in stocks and crypto trading. Somehow he just gets even more intolerable as we go on. As the two of them continued to speak, they were messaging like every single day on Snapchat. Nawal was putting in a shift for this. But as the two of them grew closer, she began trying to get some secrets out of Farouk. She started with small ones that, you know, the stakes weren't too high to gain his trust. Once she showed him that she could keep small secrets, then he started telling her bigger ones until he eventually broke. And one day he said, I did something when I was younger. It was a mistake. I told you my real name. I can't specifically go to the UK for something that happened there. It's been 14 years since I travelled. The only reason I'm scared is because you told me you're a writer and a journalist. You're the last person I should talk to. So clearly he knows just how risky it is to be opening up to Nawal like this, and I'm actually really surprised that she was honest with him and told him that she was a BBC journalist and everything. Yeah, I'm just really shocked that that didn't put him off. Clearly he is just desperate for some socialisation, especially with a woman. A part of him just couldn't help it, just couldn't help himself. He had been craving human connection for so long, and he'd been so isolated in his little house in the mountains or wherever. And Nawal could tell how desperate he was, and she was kind of playing on that a bit. Don't blame her, this guy's a murderer. So she was saying to him like, oh, maybe we should get on a FaceTime call soon. And Farouk was hesitant, but eventually he came around to the idea and he picked up the call. In this conversation, Farouk said that he doesn't know what answers the family of Martina even want. What? He was under the impression that since nothing can bring their daughter back, then what's the point? What's the point them even still thinking about it? In fact, he refused to ever speak with Martina's family directly because it would be too hard for him. Too hard for him. The audacity of Farouk Abdulhak to rip the life from this woman and then claim that it's just all too much for him to deal with. As the conversation, this FaceTime call continued, Nawal was pushing for an in-person meeting, and of course, again, Farouk was very hesitant to do so. Eventually, he kind of came round to it, saying that he would be willing to meet in person, but it had to be just the two of them, no one else. She had to fly to Yemen and come to his house. Nawal was understandably very wary about doing this, going somewhere to be alone with a suspected murderer and rapist. So while she was trying to change the conditions of their in-person meeting, they continued to FaceTime and text. And he mentioned something at some point about how he thought about giving the family closure, but he'd never done it. In fact, his exact quote was, "It's already been 14 years, what's another 2?" And actually, as soon as he'd said that, he demanded to change the subject. He did that quite a bit, because obviously he thinks he's just talking to a lady. He's just getting to know this lady. But really, all she wants to talk about is Martina. By this point, Nawal was really struggling to keep her cool with Farouk because she believed wholeheartedly, as most of us do, that he was a cold, stubborn rapist and murderer. Not only that, but he was sitting there on FaceTime and playing games with her. And just like he was playing games with the justice system. She had pretty much had enough of this, and so she eventually gave him an ultimatum of sorts, saying that she couldn't continue talking to him unless she knew the truth of the Martina situation that he was so secretive about. So finally, after months of laying the groundwork, Farouk was ready to talk. He claimed that that whole night was just such a blur and he only really remembers it in flashbacks, which he blamed on the cocaine. But he insisted that what happened to Martina was just an accident, nothing nefarious. He said it was a sex accident gone wrong. I'm sure you're thinking the exact same thing that I am thinking right now. bullshit. Martina was evidently not interested in Farouk like that. She had turned down his advances time and time again. Her body was found beaten and bloody. She had bled all the way down the stairs. What kind of rough sex gone wrong would leave a woman like that? I mentioned the Grace Millane case earlier on in this episode, but I think it's worth bringing up again because there are a lot of parallels between this case and that one. Grace went on a Tinder date when she was backpacking in New Zealand. She met this guy that she thought was really cool. She went home with him and then she was never seen again. He was later seen removing her body from the hotel room in a suitcase. He later claimed that that too was just rough sex gone wrong and Grace had asked for it. There's so much victim blaming when it comes to these rough sex gone wrong kind of defences. Because as I said in that video, no woman has ever consented to being murdered during sex. And I think it's worth repeating that Martina never even wanted to have sex with him, and she told him that multiple times. So why would she turn around and decide, oh yeah, okay then, on this one particular night, and then he beats her up? Like, none of it is adding up for him to be able to use that as a defence. Like, not even close. So when he'd said this to Narwhal, that it was just rough sex gone wrong, she was probing him a bit further and she was like, well, if it was an accident, why would you drag her body down to the basement and cover in a load of rubble? And Farouk couldn't really give her a solid answer because, like I say, it's just not adding up. All he did say was that he deeply regrets the unfortunate accident that happened. He regrets going to Yemen and should have stayed and paid the piper, aka bear the consequences of his actions in London. But he said to Narwhal that it's just too late for him now. He feels like he can't go back to the UK. The UK are very biased against him, actually, is what he believes. So he maintained that he will never be surrendering himself. Although this undercover mission by Narwhal didn't bring about complete justice, it did bring about a partial confession. This is the first time anyone has ever gotten Farouk to admit that he is responsible for her death. Just 2 years ago, in 2022, there was another pretty big development in this case. In fact, an arrest was made, but it wasn't Farouk. It was an unnamed woman in her 60s that was arrested by police in London on suspicion of helping Farouk evade justice for over a decade. Martina's family flew to London as soon as they heard this news. They wanted to speak with the police. They went and sat there and they said, "Who is it?" And police said that they couldn't tell them. Their family pleaded with lawyers and with police for answers, and they had a feeling that it was probably Farouk's mother. But the police said to them that they could not confirm nor deny that it was Farouk's mother. And off the record, I always think that means confirm. That's just my own personal opinion there. Because I mean, if it wasn't, then just say that. If it wasn't, then you can just say no. But let me clarify that nothing's ever really been confirmed there. They've never come out and said who this unnamed woman in her 60s really is. But everyone thinks it's Farouk's mum. Are there any other women in the whole entire world that are like reaching their elder years and would be willing to put their freedom on the line for Farouk Abdulhak? So Martina's family did some of their own digging. I love how everyone's becoming a detective in this case. They managed to find an estranged family member who could give them the dirt on Farouk's mother. Apparently, Farouk and his mama had always had a very special relationship. Farouk was definitely her favourite child, and she made that very obvious. And actually, around the time of this mystery woman's arrest in London, his mum's apartment was raided by the police. So I'm just putting two and two together at this point. And they tore that shit to shreds, bro. They like pulled up all the carpets, all the floorboards. They were pulling photos off the wall. They were like breaking everything that she had to like look inside it to see if she'd hidden anything in there. The police seemed to believe that this woman, his mother, had helped him escape to Yemen all those years ago. And if they couldn't get to Farouk himself, then they decided that they were going to try and get everyone close to him that had committed a crime in order to protect him. Whether the arrested woman is his mother or not, it's still the biggest development that we've had in this case for years. And Martina's family continues to stay in contact with the Yemeni authorities 16 years later. They are not letting this go. In fact, no one is letting this case go, which I think is absolutely incredible. Everyone that knew Martine or has heard about this case is keeping it in the conversation. This case has been very intriguing to look into because we have two very dedicated families that are fighting complete opposite sides of this war. Martina's mum and dad are doing absolutely everything in their power to bring her justice, and Farouk's mum and dad are doing absolutely everything in their power to avoid it. But at the core of it all was a young girl who trusted her friend. She and Farouk had become close over the last 8 months. They went to the same uni, they had the same friend group. Of course, she felt like she could trust him. It's a tale as old as time for women and girls alike. You make friends with a guy, you want things to remain strictly platonic. You enjoy your platonic friendship with this guy, but a lot of the time they just won't take no for an answer. Or at least they're always waiting for you to change your mind. Martina had stated her boundaries with Farouk time and time again, and every time Farouk overstepped, she was forgiving, and she would just remind him that, look, I don't see you like that, but she would still be friends with him. But I think Farouk believed he could manipulate Martina and make her change her mind. But it wasn't working, was it? She was a strong woman and she wanted what she wanted. Or more accurately, she didn't want what she didn't want. And that was Farouk. When he realised that he couldn't manipulate her or change her mind, it seemed he'd just straight up murdered her and hid her body in the basement. Today, Farouk Abdulhak is still stranded, trapped in Yemen, a country still torn up by the civil war. Now that his father is dead and gone, Farouk is no longer secure and protected. Sources closest to him say that he is very paranoid and he's afraid to leave the house. He has no life, he has no freedom, and he has no one around him, well, hardly anyone around him that still loves him and cares about him. It's no prison sentence, but it sure is hell in its own unique way. He ruined his own life. He made his bed and now he must lie in it forever. Daddy's money can't save him now. Maybe he hopes that this will all just blow over and people will stop caring eventually. But we're here to make sure that that doesn't happen. I encourage all of you that are listening to this episode right now to keep screaming for justice for Martine Vik Magnussen. Her parents have actually set up a website called justiceformartine.com. You can go there, there's so much information about this case on there and about Farouk himself. There is a whole page dedicated to telling you everything they know about him, which I think is really good because he wants people to forget about him. He wants this all to blow over and to be able to go out in public and be fine again. But we're not going to let that happen. They also have a place where you can donate on that website for the Martine Foundation for Justice. And I just want to read you directly off of their mission statement. The foundation will provide financial support to relatives of victims in unsolved cases involving injustice, so that the cases are not put aside or forgotten, but tried legally in a fair manner. Support for legal assistance, as well as reward for tips leading to the arrest of serious criminals, falls into this category. This case just absolutely breaks my heart, and it makes me so incredibly angry to think about him sitting in his Yemeni mansion. Surely it can't all last much longer. I mean, he's only 35. He has so much life left to live, but he can't do anything with it. I encourage all of you to go to that website, to donate if you can, to read through the things that they do, and just to make noise about this case on social media, well, anywhere that you can. Share this video around, share Martine's story around, and don't let anyone forget that Farouk Abdulhak should be over here in the UK. And that's all I'm gonna say. I'm not allowed to call him a murderer, personally, but if we bring him to the UK, then the courts can do that for me. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video, and thank you again to NordVPN for sponsoring. Remember, there's an exclusive deal for you guys when you click the link in the description of this video. That's nordvpn.com/Eleanor. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a thumbs up or a comment. If you engage with this video in some kind of way, sharing it with a friend, that tells YouTube that you enjoyed this content, and in turn, they will be nice to us, and they'll suggest us to you more often, and don't you want to see this face more? Eh? Oh my god, I can't wink. Again, the link to the charity Justice for Martine will be down in the description. I encourage all of you to click it and go exploring. But thank you so much for watching. If you want to watch another one of my videos, there'll be one on screen right now. Or if you want to subscribe to my channel, you can click the circle with my face in and make sure you click the little bell notification thingy. That way you'll never miss when we upload. And again, who would want to miss this face? Sorry, I'm in a cheeky mood now. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!